What's up, YouTube? So far things seem to be going well. I haven't had any problems of concern since the truck got out of the shop, and I've just decided the only thing that's going to make me feel comfortable is time. Time seeing the problem not repeat and feeling like, the shop actually did do its job. I still have a lot of nervousness about it, but all I can do is keep going and keep going. That's pretty much it. Well, it seems the poll that I posted unintentionally was the best poll to post, because the poll that I posted was addressing the biggest concerns about van life. So the specific wording of the poll was, what van life challenge intimidates you most? And the primary options I gave were having to find showers and/or bathrooms, parking safely at night, basically addressing the fear of the knock, and being in strange or unknown areas in general, as well as vehicle issues and breakdowns. Unsurprisingly, vehicle issues and breakdowns actually won with about 50% of the poll. Parking and safety came in second, showers and bathrooms came in third, and being in strange or unknown areas came in last. I don't really count other as an option, even though it did have like a very small percentage right behind being in strange or unknown areas, and I think that's because being in strange or unknown areas kind of overlaps with parking safety. If you're concerned about one, you tend to be concerned about the other. If you're concerned about the other, you can tend to be concerned about one. They kind of meld together, but I do consider them kind of different, because you could feel very comfortable once you get, let's say you get an RV and you're going to an RV park. You could be very comfortable once you're at your RV's park or once you're at your predestined spot, but parking safely in between points A and B, especially if A and B are very far apart, might be a completely different issue from once I get there, I'll feel safe. So that's why I separated those two things. Now, I do think this is an appropriate ranking of concerns. Breakdowns are the scariest thing, and I'm gonna say something that's gonna piss some people off. It's not just about money. If you get stranded in some remote location, your immediate concern is not monetary, it's safety. If you're boondocking in remote locations, among other things, you might not have a cell signal. So it's very important before you go driving off into the unknown, you feel like if you get stuck, you have the tools to feel safe. For me, one of my latest tools to feel a little bit safer about maybe going out off into the middle of nowhere has been my spot device. This is my ability to call 911 even if I don't have a cell signal. Now, in my case, luckily in this situation, I was perfectly safe in an easily accessible city area when I found myself needing a tow, and even before that, before the situation even got worse, I was at the house of a person I knew when the truck stopped running. That was the most ideal situation. What's really scary is if you go out boondocking by yourself as a solo traveler, there's not really a lot of people around, and suddenly your vehicle won't start. And that's kind of what I have something like this for, a satellite communicator. I did a whole video on satellite communicators. This makes me feel a little bit safer about getting stranded out in the middle of nowhere. Getting towed out in the middle of nowhere can be a little bit more tricky. So if you do decide to get an unusual vehicle, like an ambulance, a bus, anything that's not like an off-the-rack RV or an off-the-rack van, anything that's kind of going into some sort of weird area, always please call your roadside service and check under what conditions they service your vehicle. The AAA that worked great for you when you were on a regular road is not going to come out into the middle of boondocking land and get you. So definitely make sure whatever roadside service you have not only will service a vehicle your size, because that AAA you had for your minivan or your car may not tow your RV, so always double check. So one, check it will actually tow the type of vehicle you have, and two, check the limitations about being off-road, and three, be prepared to pay for a tow out of pocket. Just in case, be prepared to pay for a tow out of pocket, because if nothing else works out, at least you know part of your cushion, and again, this was a learning experience for me this past time, part of your cushion needs to be just in case. Even though I have this roadside program, I want to make sure I'm prepared to tow out of pocket if I need to. That's an important thing to have. But before you get that tow, you may just be concerned that you're in an unfamiliar area and you don't know who's around or what they're going to do. Again, you may be concerned for your immediate safety, and that is part of the fear of breakdowns, and I completely get it. Now, what make you feel more comfortable is having a weapon. And when I say having a weapon, I do not mean everybody go out and buy a gun. If you are not trained to use a gun, if you're not comfortable using a gun, then you could be as dangerous to yourself as you could to any potential intruder. So, like, that is not the answer for everyone. And it's perfectly okay if that is not your answer. A blunt instrument, such as a bat, can also serve as a security device. So maybe just have something on hand that if you needed to use a blunt instrument, you could use it. Of course, you can also have like bear spray or mace or something in that category. But any of those canned items that you spray are as dangerous to you indoors as it is to anyone else. So these are really only items you can use outside of your vehicle, perhaps getting away from an assailant or something like that. It's not a bad idea to have them, but do know where you can and can't use them so that they're not a danger to you. That's sort of the tricky thing. And the other thing people always advise for security, when you're by yourself, again, your vehicle's been stranded, your services haven't arrived yet, and you just want to feel safe. The other thing people always advise, and I hate this, is a dog. And it's not because I hate dogs. I adore dogs, and that's why I hate when people advise this. If you want a dog, great. That is amazing. I want a dog, but I think right now in my lifestyle, and also the fact that I already have the cat, I don't know that I have the right situation, state of mind, safe environment for me to take on a dog in my life at this time. I felt secure in taking on the cat at the time that I took him on, but I don't know that I feel secure enough to take on a dog. Now, some people have a dog before they enter van life, or even multiple pets. But going out and getting a dog specifically for security, if you are not fully committed to what it means to raise an animal, can cause more problems for you than solutions. Those times when you need your dog to be security may be few and far in between. But the whole time that dog is there, it's going to need to eat, it's going to need to sleep, it's going to need vet care, it's going to get older, it's going to need senior care as it ages. There's just a lot, and you need to make sure you are 100% committed to what it means to have a dog before you get one. Please do not get it just for security. Get a dog because you want a dog. So yes, if you love dogs and you want a dog anyway, and you are prepared, a dog can be a great sense of security when you are stranded by yourself. But make sure you are fully committed and understand what it means to have that dog, and not expect it just to be a security system that's going to turn on when you're nervous about a situation. Another concern when you're stranded might be your food and water supply. Let's say you boondocked for 2 weeks and you had enough supplies for 2 weeks. You go to start your vehicle and it won't start. This could be problematic. Now, I honestly have rarely to never run into anyone who were out their food and water supply at a point where maybe they were having car trouble. This doesn't mean that it can't happen. It could happen. So what you want to think about maybe is being prepared to go into town when your supplies are diminished as opposed to when they're gone. So that at least if there's a problem, you at least have a small supply buffer if there is a delay in figuring out how to get help. As opposed to everything being gone and also your vehicle isn't working. Like I said, I've hardly to never heard of this happening. Like, usually you're going into, like, I know people who have built their vehicles around cold weather because they like cold weather sports or cold weather activities, so they've built their rig around cold weather. So it's already prepared to handle the fact that it's cold. It's already prepared, you know, for those situations, because they're prepared to live in that with a functional vehicle. So honestly, the situation doesn't change very much with an unfunctional vehicle, because your goal is still the same. You're going to seek help, and if your vehicle's already prepared to handle cold weather, you're going to be okay in the cold. If your vehicle is already prepared to handle heat, probably you're going to be already prepared to handle heat, unless again you put yourself in a position where you're completely out of the things you need to handle that before you try to make a move. And that's why I say always try to get ahead of being completely out. Like, let's say you use a generator to run your AC and you're in a very hot state. Probably don't try to run into town for gas when your gas can for your generator, which is going to run your AC, is empty. You know, let's say you're using propane for heat and it's cold. Maybe don't prepare to run into town when you're completely out of propane, as opposed to when you're getting low, but you could survive a few days if you needed to. Now, something else that might help you out in a stranded situation is a tow vehicle, or what's commonly called a towed. The good thing about having a tow vehicle or a secondary vehicle, especially if you have a big rig like a bus, a large RV, you know, anything, even my box truck, I'm not set up to tow. I don't have a hitch in the back, but if I did, like, that might be an option, also towing a second vehicle. And the good thing about that is if your primary vehicle doesn't work for some reason, that secondary vehicle ideally would be available. The chances of both of them breaking would be really, really slim. The problem with toads is it's very difficult to always, if you decide to like get rid of your house, just live on the road, just live in your rig, and literally own or rent no property, you are always going to be hauling around these two vehicles. There's no break from it. Now, if there's two of you, it might be a little bit easier. I met a mother and daughter who had a Class A and a tow vehicle. And the good thing was, if they were in a situation where like maneuvering them both was difficult, the daughter could drive the tow vehicle and the mom could drive the Class A, etc., etc. You know, with the tow vehicle, before you start maneuvering your large vehicle into some tricky spaces, you can have somebody in the towed go out, take the tow vehicle, you know, see if it makes sense to even bring your bigger rig down this road into this area, if there's places to park, etc., etc., especially when you're out boondocking. But if you're on your own, you won't be able to separate the vehicles ever. Now, once you get your big rig parked, you can disconnect your towed and then use it to get around and do things without having to worry about moving the big rig. But in the day-to-day life of having two vehicles, a main vehicle and a tow vehicle, it can get complicated. So you do need to think about that ahead of time. But on the safety and stranded issue, if your main vehicle doesn't work, you have your secondary vehicle that you can use. I personally would never own two vehicles. It'd just be too much of a pain in the butt. To me, it'd be easier if I was really that desperate to rent something, as opposed to trying to constantly always have two. Because the other problem with that is keeping insurance on two vehicles, keeping up the mechanical updates on two vehicles, making sure that the vehicle can be towed if you want to do 4 wheels on the ground towing. Not every vehicle can be towed behind a vehicle, and in that case, the only way to tow it is to, you know, get one of those ramp type tows where you can like put it literally up off of its 4 wheels. Not every vehicle can be towed on 4 wheels, and so there's only a small amount of vehicles you can buy if you want to tow it behind a larger vehicle on its own 4 wheels. So there are a lot of things to consider with having a towed, even though it does provide the advantage of, if your primary vehicle dies, you have that secondary vehicle to get to help, still have a vehicle to get around town in, all these other things. So there are benefits and disadvantages, but that is an option if you are going after a bigger rig and that rig is specifically for travel. It might have a lot more advantages than disadvantages. And then, like, a huge huge scary part of your vehicle not running. Like, if it's running bad, I hate to say it, but you feel like you have some options. Like, if you can get the thing to come on and move, you feel like you have some options. Like, if you go to a mechanic and you're not feeling it, it's very easy to say, never mind, put your keys in the car and go somewhere else, because it's just running bad. It may be doing weird, maybe it's misfiring. You don't want to drive it for a month, but you feel like if you don't like a mechanic, you can drive away. The problem with if it breaks down in a way where you can't drive it is likely you're probably just going to take it to the closest mechanic. And if you're in a strange town halfway across the country from where you live, you may not have your go-to guy to physically look at the vehicle. All you might have is just the closest available guy. And if your vehicle is completely disabled, it might be your only choice. For example, my vehicle was not completely disabled, but when I drove into Ashland in my minivan in my Toyota Sienna, I pulled into a 7-Eleven, and a guy comes out the 7-Eleven, and he's like, is that your vehicle leaking antifreeze all over the ground? And I'm like, what? And I get out of my van, and sure enough, radiator problem. I basically have coolant all over the ground. Now, I could drive it still, but because of the risk of overheating, I obviously didn't want to drive it all over Kingdom Come. So I did end up taking it to the closest available mechanic, who happened to be at a gas station not too far away. And whatever he priced me for the job, I was kind of willing to pay it because I was out of options, and I didn't really know if going to anybody else was going to make that big of a difference. And everybody is going to charge you to look at the problem in the first place. Well, not everybody, but a lot of mechanics are going to charge you to look at the problem in the first place before they'll even quote you a price. And luckily in that situation, I was in Ashland for a job and I was given employee housing. So while my minivan was at the mechanic, I had employee housing and I was about to start a job. So the financial hurt wasn't insane, but I had to go to the closest available mechanic, and I talked to another mechanic later, and he was like, yeah, he way overcharged you for that. It shouldn't have cost you that much. Now, he did the work was done, but it definitely cost me a little bit more because I was in a situation where, to protect my house, which was the minivan at the time, the closest available mechanic was just what made sense. I didn't want to drive all over town with an overheating car, even though driving was possible. The less you know about the actual mechanical operations of your vehicle, the less you're going to be able to assess what a mechanic is telling you is wrong or what will fix it. Like, you won't know what to trust. And especially as a female. Because even though I would say most men in 2021 know about as much about cars as women, the stereotype is still women know less about cars than men. Therefore, if somebody is going to try to take advantage of you, they're more likely to do it to a woman than they will do it to a man. And that is a reasonable fear to have whenever you're having a conversation with a mechanic about something that's wrong with your vehicle. Now, while I was at Gutted, I did meet a young lady who she was buying a bus, a diesel bus, or she had bought a diesel bus. She had bought it already. And she went to diesel mechanic school to learn how to work on her own engine. And I had to give her points for her grit. But I also know that's not a realistic expectation to have for everybody. I have been educated on portions of my vehicles as I've had them. Like, I used to hear people talk about alternators all the time. I honestly didn't know what the crap they were talking about. I'd never heard of an alternator. And so, like, before Vanlife, I'd never heard of an alternator, and I was definitely driving before Vanlife. And so one day, when AAA came out to give me a jump, the guy was standing there. I was like, can you just point to the alternator so I can know what it is? And he pointed to the alternator. and explained to me what it does. And that was the day I learned about alternators. And that's more how I have educated myself on the little bit that I know about cars. When I've been in a situation where I could ask a question or ask multiple questions, I have. I wouldn't say I know everything about my vehicle. And if you give me a large diagram, my brain is going to break. But I have been learning about little things in pieces. But there's still things that intimidate me when I come up against them and I don't know how to fix them. And that can be very scary. And there's really nothing to do except, honestly, and people are not going to agree with me with this, sometimes just be prepared to pay the bill. Because the less you know about the problem, the less likely you are to fix it on your own. And if you can't fix it on your own, all you can do is pay somebody else to fix it. So you need to be more financially prepared the less you actually know about vehicles. And that's just the reality. So now that we've covered the biggest concern, let's get into some of the other things that were in the poll. Number 2 was parking safely, at night. And this can be parking safely at night, whether you're in a city or boondocking. But let's talk about city parking first, because I honestly think a lot of people are more scared about that, especially when it comes to getting from point A to B and you think you might have to stop in between points A and B on the way to somewhere. Now, there's also people, just to say it, who are parking in the city because they're trying to save money by living out of a vehicle. They're going to college, but they can't live in the dorms. There's a lot of other reasons people live in a vehicle besides traveling constantly all over the place. Some people are doing it for financial limitations, financial reasons, or to open more financial doorways. All of these reasons exist for reasons people will park their vans in the city, and a lot of them are unsure about where to park safely while doing so. And the problem is, everybody wants this grand guide on how to do it. First of all, I, mostly living in California and maybe visiting a couple places here and there, honestly can't tell you how to park in Tennessee. I've never lived in Tennessee constantly. I can't tell you how to safely do it, because I don't live there. Now, there are some apps such as iOverlander and freecampsites.net and probably some more out there. I think there's like one called RV Parky or something like that. But most of these apps are user-contributed apps. By that, somebody went somewhere, they slept a nice night, they go into the app, and they report that they were able to sleep a night, 2 nights, 3 nights, 4 nights there without being bothered. And that's nice and all, but the thing is, what was true last year could not be true the next year. It only takes one person to ruin it. I had this experience. I found a Walmart on iOverlander. I forgot what state I was in, but it was a state I'd never been in before. It was while I was crossing the country into Baltimore, and before I came back to California. And so, I just used the iOverlander because I didn't know the city, so I needed to find some place to sleep. So I found a Walmart on there, and the first night I slept there at that Walmart, and I was in town for a few days, I was fine. Nothing happened. I pulled into the Walmart. There were some other RVs there. Went to bed. Woke up in the morning. Went to the city during the day. And because I was still kind of in the same area, I said, I'm going to go right back to this Walmart. So I went back to that Walmart. Went back to sleep that night. And before I caught my Z's, I got a knock. And it was the security guy. The security guy was like, I'm sorry. We're not allowing RV parking anymore, overnight parking anymore, or whatever. And I politely said, okay, that's totally cool. And I was kind enough that he actually told me where to park. I just talked to him really, really nice. I knew it wasn't fun for him either. He didn't know who he was going to run into in that parking lot. And it was a borderline parking lot for me. I didn't feel like I was going to get hurt, but I also didn't feel like, it was the most unsketchy place in the world. So I'm sure there were some people with issues in that parking lot. But he was really nice, and he actually told me where I could park, which was great. So first of all, if you do get the knock, be polite. At the end of the day, you do not own the property. If you're trying to parking lot park, at the end of the day, you don't own the property. Now, I personally have never had a cop knock on my door since I've been living in any of my vehicles. I have never had a cop like knock and tell me to move on. I've never been bothered in street parking, even in my box truck. I have been asked to leave parking lots, or, you know, woken up to a warning on my windowsill if I didn't wake up. And that only happened in the box truck. It never happened in the other vehicles because I always heard them knocking. But, point being, in 48 hours, the situation in that Walmart changed. So even if these apps exist that are based on previous people's experience, you can use it as a guide, but that's all it is. Because Mike didn't have a problem a year ago doesn't mean Richard won't a year later. You just can never know. And so you do have to develop your own parking rhythm in a way of figuring out where it is safe to park. You can start just by looking at street signs, you know, watching the hours of the day. If you do make friends with people like in the area, like they can also help guide you a little bit, like actual people you're meeting who are currently sleeping and living in that area. And, you know, you have to judge who you want to trust and who you want to hang out with based on your own sort of gut in a way. As a general rule, you don't want to go into neighborhoods that have a bunch of driveways where people very rarely to never park on the street. If parking looks tight, and you can definitely tell that somebody would get sensitive if you just post up in front of their house, it's probably not a good idea to park in that area. A lot of times, if you're doing neighborhood parking, you're looking for the kind of places that have a good mix of street parking, where like people mostly can get in front of their houses, but there is the stray spot here and there, either on the side of a house or, you know, near somebody's back, you know, gate or something. But it's definitely one of those situations where it's like you pull up late, you go to sleep, you get out of there in the morning type of thing. For parking lots, it's a gamble, you know, it's a gamble. You just gotta take a survey and try to think, you know, would it be weird if there were a couple of cars here overnight? Places that are open all night, sometimes 24-hour gyms, even if you don't have a membership. A lot of times you can get away with being in those parking lots, but it could be a gamble depending on how many problems they have. A lot of people with Planet Fitness memberships barely to never sleep anywhere but the Planet Fitness parking lot. Like, that is their spot. Sometimes you can find things like parking rides. It's a thing you really have to go through and find your rhythm about. And I think the people who are passing through town are going to approach it in a way different way than somebody who might be living in a van while still having like a city job or going to college and therefore constantly in the area instead of passing through. Now I find when I'm traveling, when I'm doing like state to state travel or traveling long distances, if I can find a truck stop or a rest area, that's where I'm going to stay that night. I'm not going to go try and find boondocking spots in between point A and B if I have a point A and B. Like, you know, if I know I'm going, let's say I go to Arizona, RTR in January. I know that my end goal is RTR, and in between that, I'm probably going to stick with truck stops and rest areas because they have bathrooms, they have trash cans, they have, you know, unless there's a really, really like, I want to see this in between point A and B type stuff, I don't tend to leave the main road just because it means I'll have constant access to resources along the way, and I feel like it's safer, especially with me traveling alone. So between point A and B, I personally am not going to go skipping off into the middle of a boondocking location. Some people love back roads. They love to find boondocking locations along the way. It's not something I tend to do. And there's no right or wrong. For me, I feel safer traveling alone until I get to at a big event like that. Just staying on rest areas and truck stops, especially truck stops, because if something does happen to my vehicle in the morning, I'm at a truck stop. There's probably a mechanic somewhere. You know, a lot of truck stops also have like, you know, truck servicing locations nearby, if not internally. So for me traveling alone, I tend to like that. Not everybody likes that. Now, the other safety concern with parking safely might be camping. Now, for people who've never camped before, like me, I'd never camped in my life, you know. The idea of going out into like forest land or BLM land or anything like that might be super intimidating. It might be very intimidating. They've never dealt with wildlife. They've never dealt with living wild. Now me, I consider being poor and camping pretty equal. Like a lot of the stuff, people like act like it's going to be a hardship. I'm like, well, I dealt with that just from being poor. But even still, what I haven't dealt with is like bears, like, you know, and other wildlife. And so educate yourself if you are going into a situation where there might be wildlife on the wildlife in the area so that you feel better prepared to handle it. If you're going into bear country, you may need to prepare to be in bear country. And it doesn't mean you need to spend your whole time there afraid of a bear, but you might need to be cautious about like food in a way that you wouldn't if you weren't in bear country. So if you're going into any sort of wildlife area, just do your research and then try to be safe and like follow best practices about being safe while you're in that area so that you can enjoy being out in the wild and feeling safe at the same time. I feel like when you're in city areas, like your concern is people. It's police and criminals, both of them. You know, it's getting the knock from the police or security, which has been most of my situations, and avoiding that as much as possible, but also not being targeted by criminals because you've parked yourself in a vulnerable position. And so you're avoiding people in the city, one way or the other, both sides. You're trying to be ignored by criminals and ignored by the cops. That's your goal. When you get out into boondocking and you're trying to park safe, you want to make sure you don't make yourself the target of like nature. Basically, you don't want to be nature's target. You want to protect yourself from nature, and that might include just like mice getting in your vehicle. So being prepared to fight those things are basically what you're looking for parking safety in wild country. And in the city, you're trying to avoid the cops being called on you or security, and you're trying to avoid being the target of break-ins. So also, in addition to that, for city parking, you can research an area you're going to sleep in as if you were going to buy a house there. You can look at the crime rate. You can say, okay, this looks like a pretty safe neighborhood. Looks like I can park on the side of that house. Let me look real quick. Let me just look. 123 Forest Street. Okay, looks like the crime rate isn't terrible. You know, that kind of thing. Real quick. A lot of times, though, honestly, with street parking, you're probably going to go with your gut. But if you're really concerned, just do some research as if you were going to be able to buy a house in that area, and it'll probably tell you a lot. Now, the other concern is showers and bathrooms. It was third on the list. This comes up all the time, people asking about showering and going to the bathroom. And honestly, if you are super sensitive about this, you may struggle and van life may not be your thing. Here's the thing. Even if you build a shower in your rig, there's one problem: water. In van life, RV life, whatever, you will have to learn to ration and be aware of your water. It is not unlimited unless you just buy an RV and you go hook up all the time, which means you're paying RV park, prices all the time. So you might think, I'm gonna buy an RV and put a giant water tank in it. Well, here's the thing. Water's heavy. It's gonna take up weight. Can you afford the weight that your water tank is going to add? Also, the bigger your water tank, the more likely that it's going to take up a lot of space. And you're going to buy your big old rig and think, I got room for this water tank. Well, maybe you do. But what space are you losing for other things to have this large water tank? So that's the other concern with water tank size, is like, what are you gaining or losing in adding this large water tank? A lot of times in van life, what you end up doing is sort of imagining or reshaping what it means to shower. No matter what device you use to shower, it still needs the water. So you need to carry the water in some way. You need to get the water into your shower device in some way if it can't internally carry it itself. Once that shower device is empty of water, how are you refilling it? Do you have backup water for it? Is that it? Once you go out, are you rationing that off to a certain amount of showers for a certain amount of time? Are you prepared to use that shower water for other uses if you need to? You may be just re-examining what it means to have water to clean yourself and how much water you want to sacrifice to that, because you're also going to want to cook with water and you're also going to want to drink water. So there's other ways your water will be used besides just showering. Now, if you are a city van lifer, if you're like in college, or you're doing this to save money, or you're doing this to like put more money away or something like that, you may be able to post up right near the gym where you have a membership, and so going to a shower every day is not that big of a deal. However, if you want to travel, and especially if you want to go out in the middle of nowhere and really enjoy sort of the wild, as it were, you're not going to be able to get to your gym shower. You can get all the gym memberships you want. You are not going to drive 4 hours to get to the closest gym. If that's the case, you're going to make it work where you are. And even if you've built a shower in your rig, if you're cooking with water, if you're drinking water, you're not going to be able to dedicate all of the water you've taken with you just to showers. So you may have to like just fiddle with it a little bit. It's not as easy as I built a shower in my rig, so now I can shower every day, because you're not connected to city water. You still have to carry the water that is going to run through that shower. As for the bathroom, again, you're going to have to make an assessment of your own comfort. You can dig cat holes while you're camping so that you don't have to go in your rig, and you can try to use public restrooms as much as possible. For me personally, when I gotta go, I gotta go. I've never been the kind of person that could hold it. If I gotta go, I gotta go. And sometimes I don't have time to get completely out of my rig and go to the bathroom, even if it's right there. Like, once I stop, I just gotta go. So I always needed something in my rig where I could go in my rig, not outside of it. Not on the long walk to somebody's public restroom. I just need to stop the rig and go. And so that's been an issue from the beginning, and I always had to deal with the fact that that was a reality, and if that meant a bucket, it meant a bucket. That's just the way it was. Now the thing is, whatever you go in, even if you get something that approximates a toilet, or you have an RV, you still have to deal with your own waste. You're still going in the rig. Even if you have tanks underneath, you're still going in the rig, and where you go into is traveling with you until you get somewhere where you can dump what you've done. Your waste is something you will have to learn to deal with inside of any rig. Now, the way you deal with it might be different. Like, you may be able to just, if you're in an RV, connect a hose, go to a dump station, dump all your waste, and move on with your life, as opposed to if you have a bucket, you're tying up a bag, and you're finding a place to dispose of that properly. But either way, your waste is riding with you, and at some point, you have to deal with it. And even in an RV, which has a house approximated toilet, you may deal with smell issues and, water supply issues dealing with that, because like if you have a flushable toilet, it's also stealing from your water supply. So there's a lot to think about. How much you want to deal with. Do you want to deal with it? Would you rather have a dry toilet? Do you demand a flush toilet? What do you want to deal with? And you may have to adjust sort of what you think going to the bathroom means in a way that feels clean to you. And it may be breaking your ideas of what you thought about as clean to you in a house. I'm sure most house people would find it weird if you went in a bucket, even though essentially you're still sitting on something that holds the waste and you don't have to touch it. That's what the bag's for. So the final thing I put on the poll was just being in unknown areas, but honestly, a lot of what I said about parking applies to being in unknown areas. Educate yourself on where you're going, or educate yourself on where you are if you're forced to stop in a place you didn't plan to stop. Like if you're forced to stop in some town, and, you're thinking about maybe, picking a street to park on, do some quick research. Look around. Try to get a sense of the place. Either go with your gut or do some research, or a little bit of both, and make a decision, like if you get stuck in a strange area. If you are out boondocking, again, research the area, know the wildlife, look at the reviews on iOverlander or freecampsites.net or RV Parky or whatever you've used to find your spot if you did that. But no, if those reviews were from a year ago or 6 months ago even, or even last week, the situation could have changed, and be prepared for the fact that the situation will change. But whatever situation you're in, just do the best research you can and go with your gut. But part of being in this lifestyle is realizing that it's not a constant. Like if you want a constant, you rent a room, you buy a house, and you always go back to that place. So there's a constant. You're home, you get in your vehicle, you go to work, you're at work. You commute back, you're home. And that is a constant. And a lot about it isn't going to change one way or the other. Even if you're a city van lifers and you have a job, or you're going to college or whatever, your life is not constant. Again, what was secure last week may not be secure next week, and you need to be prepared for that change. And if you can't deal with that, you may not be good for van life. You just may not be a good fit for it. And sometimes you won't know until you try it. And if you have the ability to try it and get out of it of your own free will, why not try it if you think you're interested? But be open to the adventure of it as well, because that's just part of it. And I don't care if you're a city van lifer, or you're going out camping all the time, or you're a part-timer or whatever. The only reason to do this is to embrace the unknown. So now that I've talked in general about everything, let's look at some of the comments that were left.
So Lynn Anthony brought up the fact that when you leave your vehicle at the mechanic and you live in it, among other things, you are giving basically someone access to your entire home and all your belongings. And if you have a mini home in there, it's going to be pretty impossible to clear it all out. So yeah, this is another one of those inherent risks that you're kind of dealing with when you live in a vehicle and it may or may not break down in a situation where you might have to have a stranger look at it. So both of these comments bring up something that's brought up a lot, and that's the idea of having income and or a job on the road. And I do say and or because some people figure out how to invest, which may not necessarily be a job in the traditional sense we think about it. But here's the thing though. Not everybody on the road or living out of a vehicle or whatever is doing the same thing. Some people just have regular old jobs. Some people work seasonally. Like, not everything has to be based around working online, especially since one of the biggest challenges to living in a vehicle is having good, fast, and secure internet. In fact, I know someone who decided not to do van life because even though they work online, just trying to make sure they always had a reliable signal was just too difficult for them. Whereas people who work seasonally, just seasonal labor jobs, don't really have that worry. They know they're going to commit a certain many months in the year to working somewhere, and then they're going to budget that money out to live for the rest of the year. So both of these comments mention concerns about either having a place to build your vehicle or the cost involved with building the vehicle or even physical limitations to building a vehicle. And the thing is, people build out vans and sell them all the time. So maybe instead of trying to budget for something where then you also have to factor in the cost of the build, the labor of the build, a place to build, maybe buying something that's already built out or buying a ready-made RV isn't the worst decision for you. I know there's a lot of clout in quote-unquote building it yourself, but if you can't do it, and if it actually makes more sense to get something already built, why not do it? So Micah here brings up dating, and dating definitely might be challenged if you're living out of a vehicle, especially in the city. Now, if you're traveling and you're constantly meeting other travelers who kind of get the lifestyle, it might be a little bit easier. But like, if you're doing it for financial reasons, that may make a potential mate wonder about your financial feasibility. Van life may not be sort of the best option if dating sort of people who live a standard sticks and bricks life are kind of a big goal for you. And I wanted to put up these last two comments to say, this is okay. You can just love living in a house. And you can desire to be back in a house if you have to live in a van temporarily. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
If there's anything I've missed, let me know. Are there van life challenges not covered by this video that maybe you'd like to see me talk about? Do you have insights beyond those discussed in this video? If you do, either of those situations, feel free to talk about those in the comments. Interactions with this channel definitely benefit the channel, so the more discussion we get going about this, the better. Alright, see you next time.
Thank you for sticking around to the end of the video. I'm still trying to get back in the flow of things, but here we go. My standard reminders that YouTube runs itself by this thing called the algorithm, and the algorithm likes when you leave those comments and you hit the subscribe button and you hit that thumbs up button. Like, all those things really count for me. As always, I'd like to send out my special thanks to my supporters on YouTube memberships and Patreon, and I hope to see everyone around for the next video. Have a lovely evening and be well.